My name's Craig Harris, and I'm a technical specialist with Microsoft Federal's Business Applications team. And what I want to about today is webinars, because within our team, we've actually had a great deal of success with webinars and building a community around them and the topics that we share with that community. And I say success, we've had good attendance in our webinars. Registration data is often in several hundred every time that we schedule one of these. And then when we have the webinar itself, we have good back and forth with the community where they ask questions, they help us inform what follow-on topics would be, and all around that it's been this really rewarding thing where we've been able to drive that community and also grow our cognizance elsewhere. With people outside of our organization that can then as follow on to that drive and impact our business. So I wanted to put together this video and kind of talk about how we've gone about doing that, what some of the things to keep in mind are. And a lot of these are based around lessons learned through us going through this entire process. Simple little things like choreography and whatnot. But so basically, what I wanted to touch on today was how to schedule a webinar and settings that you should keep in mind. I'll also talk about advertising and using AKA redirects so that you can share your registration link in social media or internally, however you'd like to do that. Just a simple way to make it shorthand to deliver that out. I'll talk a little bit about the choreography of the webinar itself. So how you set up presenters and settings that you need to keep in mind in meeting, because we've found that it's actually, we've had a lot more success by changing certain settings as we go through the meeting. And I'll talk about those. And I'll also talk about artifacts, like what do we, our team, get out of these meetings, out of these webinars, and how do we use that to impact our business going forward? So one of those, of course, being registration and attendance data. It gives you insight into who's attending your webinars and what topics they're interested in, and you can use that to drive follow-on actions. And I'll also talk about the videos themselves, like how you would record the webinar. I'll give a couple options, and then how you can post edit that webinar video to make it look more professional for sharing either internally or externally, however you want to go about doing that. And I'll talk about a couple different examples there as well. So thank you, and looking forward to sharing more on this topic with you, and looking forward to seeing what your team can put together and build a community around your interests. Okay, to begin, the first thing that we have to do is obviously we have to schedule our webinar. And the way that you go about doing this is directly within Microsoft Teams, which is what we're looking at here on my screen. So setting up a webinar is not dissimilar to scheduling a meeting in Outlook, so it's probably going to be pretty familiar to you. Where you start is you actually come over here on the left-hand bar and you go to Calendar, and in the top right, you'll see New Meeting, but you'll have a couple different options. You can do a regular meeting, webinar, or a live event. And for our exercise today, we're going to do a webinar. So if I click on that, you'll see that the dialog box that pops up here, it's pretty much the same thing as to what you would expect if you were scheduling a meeting through Outlook. The only difference is there's some different functionality that's superimposed on this, and we'll kind of step through what some of those things are, namely the registration form and then the meeting itself. So for title, I'm just going to add webinar. For required presenters, I'm going to add my boss, Steve Winward, because he's out of office today, and who doesn't want to schedule a meeting for their boss when they're out of office? I'm sure he's going to love reading this later whenever he takes a look at it. But anyway, and you identify the date when you're going to schedule something, the time as to when you're going to schedule it. I'm going to leave those static for now. Location, I'm going to go ahead and leave empty. And then for details, just like in a regular meeting, you'd add your agenda with bullets. 1, bullets, 2, bullets, 3, right? Nothing groundbreaking. It's the same kind of stuff that you deal with if you're scheduling a regular meeting. But what's different here is that there's a registration form that serves as kind of the user-based front end once you have this webinar scheduled and published, right? This is going to be the thing that people see whenever they're trying to come and attend your meeting or register for your event, what have you, right? And you can get to that information here through View Registration Form. Now, it's important to note that the information that you're filling in here for the webinar itself does not carry over into the registration form. And this is especially important to keep in mind when it comes to time, because when we were doing our first couple of webinars, we found that we were setting the time in our meeting invite here, but it didn't carry over to the registration form, and we had a disconnect. So just keep that in mind whenever you're doing this. And if I click on view registration form and then drag that back into screen, this is the form that I was talking about. So I can change the time here, and it won't necessarily change the time in the underlying meeting invite. So just keep that in mind. You add a separate title webinar, right? And nothing fancy. Description, same thing here. You'd add your agenda. Just keep in mind that everything that you're adding in here, this is what's going to be public facing whenever folks, go to register for your event. And how they register, you can capture their name here, their last name, email address. You can add different fields. Let's say job title. You can add that as a separate field, make it required or not. You can customize this however you'd like. You can identify key speakers that are going to be there during the presentation itself. You can also upload an image here that provides like a banner at the top of your screen. I'll go ahead and upload an image. And this is the banner that we used on our most recent webinar on April 20th. And click on done. And you can see that populates here at the top, and it becomes kind of like a visual way of doing this. Just sort of tips and tricks here. I would set up a banner, like if you're going to be doing this in some sort of cadence, right? Whether it be monthly, quarterly, however often you do this, you want to have some level of brand consistency. So I would set up some kind of banner here that doesn't have any, identifiable text on it as to when the event would be held. And in that way, you can just go back and every time that you have a new one, add in what the updated information would be. So like in our case, we have the underlying banner, and the only thing that's removed from the base banner is the date and the time. And then we just add that every time that we hold a webinar. Makes your life so much simpler. And let me save, and then that will close. Close that. Good. And then when you click send, it will go ahead and schedule your webinar. Then you're kind of up and running, and you can start tweaking different settings around this. Okay, so once you have your webinar scheduled, how do you tweak the meeting settings after the fact to make sure that you're all good and set up? It's pretty simple. Again, once within the calendar, within Microsoft Teams, just like you would with an Outlook, you can open up individual meetings. In this case, your webinar will appear just like any other meeting. And like I mentioned earlier, you have your agenda added in here. You have your Teams meeting invite, same stuff that you would see if it were an Outlook meeting. But what's especially handy, and I want to call out here, is the attendance information and the registration information. I'm not going to download these and open them because I wouldn't want you to see any of our live registrant data. But this is an important thing to call out because these are very powerful sets of data that you can leverage for impacting your business and making strategic plans as to how you work with your community. Because by leveraging this, by using these pieces of data, you can see what folks are interested in your specific topics. You can track that by topic. You can see what's resonating with your community and what isn't. If you're tracking different fields in your registration form, say job title, you can see how many people in a program manager role, for example, would be attending your sessions. You can track all of these things across your business, which is very powerful and impactful. And as you continue to hold your webinars in whatever cadence that you decide to do them, you can leverage this data to inform what your next topics are going to be, or what's really resonating with your community. So I can't stress out enough as to how useful these two pieces of information are. And in our case, we actually dump all of these into a master list, and then we have a Power BI form or visual report that's built on top of that we use to visualize out all of that data. And if you look here on the top, you can see the meeting options, which is also what we really wanted to get to here. And if I open that up and then drag this back into screen, this is what you see. Now let me tweak these settings to show you what it looks like whenever we're first starting out our meetings. Yeah, and this is pretty much the setup. So we'll set it up to where only myself or whoever scheduled the webinar can bypass the lobby along with any co-organizers. And why do you do that? So what we usually like to do is we'll take the invite from that webinar itself. So when we look back here and we have this meeting invite, I'll usually copy that into a separate meeting invite, and you can send this through Outlook, however you want to schedule it. I'll take this meeting data and I'll set it into a separate meeting that's 15 minutes prior to the live webinar. And I'll have it set up to where all of our presenters will attend 15 minutes early, and we'll do kind of a systems check to make sure that everything's working, everyone's microphone is working, everyone has the ability to present or share their screen. It's just kind of a good best practice to make sure that all of your presenters are going to be up and running and good to go whenever the time start for the webinar happens, right? So because we're doing that, because we're actually opening the webinar early, we like to make sure that we leave it to where only people that we want to be in the meeting are admitted immediately, which is why we set it up this way. And we also leave it whenever we start the meeting out to where the microphone is disabled, but we do have the ability for folks to react to things they see. So like the thumbs up, the smileys, the fun little emojis that we can do within a Teams meeting. But now once we get started, once we've actually gone through that 15-minute prep session and we've, made sure everyone's good to go, and we've actually started our webinar, we usually have someone who's assigned to just sit and look here at the Teams kind of meeting options that you're looking at here, and changes these things as we go along, because there's a certain level of choreography here. So once we get started, we turn off the lobby. So we've set it to where everyone can bypass the lobby. Well, why do we do that? We do that so that as we're getting going, it doesn't end up being distracting, that people are constantly joining, you hear the tone. We make sure that the announcing when callers join or leave, that's disabled, because we just don't want it to be distracting while we're going through and hosting our webinar. This is especially useful if you're creating a video or some level of artifact that you're going to share out, either internally or externally, what have you. In our case, we actually load these on YouTube. You don't want that to be distracting while you're going through what will eventually be your video artifact. And we save that mid-meeting once we get going. What we typically like to do in our webinar sessions is we'll have a question and answer portion at the end of them that is not recorded. So we'll go ahead and disable all of our recording functionality, regardless of how we're doing it. We record ours in OBS Studio, but you can also do this through directly recording within the Teams meeting itself. But either way, we make sure that's disabled whenever we get to the question and answer portion, because we've found that people are more comfortable to come off mute and ask a question and to contribute if they know that it's not being recorded. And that's completely fair. So what we'll do when we get to that portion is we'll go ahead and allow the microphone for folks. And the chat was already enabled anyway. So what we tell people is we'll enable the setting and then save it. They'll still have to take themselves off of mute to ask a question, but what we usually have folks do is just raise their hands if they have a question, and then Teams will create a nice orderly little queue for who raised their hand first. And we'll have whoever's directing the meeting go through and call on folks and say, please go ahead and come off mute and ask your question. And then we have a good dialogue back and forth for that. But we change those meetings, between the lobby and the ability to add the microphone throughout the meeting so that we can kind of control what happens when, and it doesn't become disruptive. For example, if you had the microphone allowed for the entirety of the meeting, you may, deal with either feedback or folks coming on off mute when they don't intend to. You hear dogs barking, all the funny things that you hear in the background if that's accidental. And that's worked for us. But by all means, tweak around with these settings to see what works for you and how you want to go about conducting your webinars. Okay, one thing I do want to kind of call out here as you're getting ready to share and publicize your webinar is that the registration link, like the thing that folks have to go to be able to register for your webinar, can be a bit of a mouthful. So let me click copy registration link here and then open it up in Word so you can see it. Copy paste. So you can see there's the link. So I mean, it's quite big, quite expansive. So if what we've found is works for us is we like to use the aka.ms, Microsoft redirect system to create a shorthand version of this, which is just aka.ms whack fed biz apps webinar. But whatever redirect service you have access to, it's generally kind of a good idea to shorten that, abbreviate it in some way that's easy to share out, so you're not having to copy paste this, because you're obviously not going to be able to type it every time. Just something for you to keep in mind. Okay, so when it comes to recording your webinars, like if you want to have some sort of video artifact that you share out either internally or publicly, like say on YouTube, which is what we do, there's a couple different ways that you can create that. The simplest way is to just use the Teams record feature that's built directly within the meeting invite, and record your meeting using that built-in software. After the meeting is done, or you disable the recording, it'll save as a separate file, and then there you are. You have a recording that you can share out. It's really approachable. Anyone that's within the meeting can do this, and it's very approachable. But what we like to use with our webinar, what we found success with, because it gives us a greater range of flexibility, is leveraging OBS Studio. So you can get it by going here to obsproject.com, downloading it there. But it looks like this. You're going to get this wonderful little, advanced art kind of image here, because it's screen sharing my screen share. But anyway, this is OBS Studio. This is what I'm actually using right now to record what I'm saying. And this is also what we use to record our videos for the webinars themselves. It gives us a greater range of flexibility and captures a much higher resolution recording itself. But by all means, you can also use the built-in recording directly within Teams, and then create your artifact that way if that's more approachable for you. Okay, so finally, what I want to talk about is software that you can use to post-edit your webinar videos, regardless of how you're recording them, whether it be through the built-in Teams software or if you're using something more advanced like OBS Studio. Either way, if you want to edit your video after the fact to either trim out sections that you didn't want to capture, or make them look more professional, whatever you'd like to do, there's a couple different options you can use to do that. Now, I'll highlight two that are great. One of which being free, the other of which not being free. So the free one that I was talking about is this that you're looking at here. It's Shotcut. One of our team leads, Steve Winward, uses this all the time for his videos, and it's a great full-functioned piece of software that you can leverage to edit your videos after the fact. The one that I like to use, Filmora, is not free. It does have a cost. But I find it to be absolutely wonderful. Our Microsoft people will appreciate this, but I effectively find it to be the power platform of video editing, where what I mean by that is it's very approachable. It's very drag and drop. And actually, I can load it up here. And let me move it over so you can see my screen. Resize this. And there we go. But what you're looking at here, this is actually Filmora, and this is how I do all of our video editing after the fact. And it's really, really simple. So I can take, like, here's a webinar. I drag this into my timeline. I'll change it to my stock product settings or project settings. You bring in my webinar intro, put that in the front. Okay. And let me do a transition between those. Find my favorites. Already get that loaded there. And then boom, it's really that simple. You've already got a very professional looking video that you can then export and compile and load somewhere. Super approachable. Okay, that pretty much covers it for everything that I wanted to go over today. But just before I take off, I wanted to make sure to circle back and kind of share a consolidated list of useful links of different things that I talked about throughout this video. And the first of which being, of course, our BizApps webinar links for our Microsoft Federal BizApps team. So we have the link here for our Fed BizApps webinar itself. If you access the link and you get something that's outdated, you either get a webinar that's already past due. Don't worry about it. We'll update that link once we've confirmed and locked down what our new content is going to be for the follow-on session. And then whenever you go to that link, you'll be able to register directly from there. And we're also very interested in hearing from our community, hearing, how our webinars are going, or if there are additional topics that you'd like for us to cover whenever we host these. And this next link here, aka.ms, whack Fed webinar topics. That's how you can reach out to us and let us know what sort of topics you'd be interested in seeing. And we read all of these, and we make a point to consider those whenever we're figuring out what we're going to lock on next. And of course, it wouldn't be one of our events without mentioning our FedBizApps GitHub repo, the link posted here. We load all sorts of stuff there, not just our webinar content. So anytime that we record a webinar and we make that a video, we host it on our YouTube channel and then link it here to our GitHub repo. But that's not all that's there. We've also got white papers that talk about Microsoft's Federal Business Application Stack, the entirety of it. Good things to know, and also useful demos. We have accelerator solutions there that you can download and leverage to get you started today using Microsoft Power Apps and Dynamics. Also want to call out our privacy policy here. It's very important to all of us here at Microsoft that we respect everyone's privacy, and we want to make sure that you know that we take it seriously. So we make a point to reference this link whenever we can. Please, by all means, view that at your leisure and see different steps that you can take also in working with your communities as to how we can collectively give this topic the due diligence that it deserves. And then finally, for video software links, I've posted a couple down here that I talked about throughout this video. First of which being OBS Project, where you can get OBS Studio, which is what I use to capture all of our webinars and a lot of our content. It's very useful. Full functioned and free software that you can leverage. And then also for post editing, I have two versions here, two things that you could leverage here. First of which being Shotcut, and also the second being Filmora. And if you want to know more about Shotcut, earlier on in the video, I had this really good link to Steve Winward's demo where he walks through how to leverage Shotcut. And I show Filmora a little bit earlier on here in this video, but by all means, check those out if they have interest for you. But that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me.